Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being here with us today. I just want to begin briefly by telling you why I got involved in the subject matter, which is the history of symphonic music in Iraq. So I'm more interested in Iraqi folklore and have promoted Iraqi artists for over a decade, written about them and also brought them for tours, musical tours. What happened is that one of my trips to Iraq in 1999, during the embargo, I attended one of the Iraqi National Symphony Orchestra's concerts with my father, and was really very impressed by the quality and program despite the embargo. Sound effects. Anyway, yeah. So I made connections with the musicians with the hope to bring them to the US for a tour. And two of them left a few months before the war on Iraq in 2003. And we began to communicate via email, trying to see how we can bring this symphony orchestra, to tour in the US. To make the story short, I began to produce monthly e-newsletters, electronic newsletters about the history and the musicians of the orchestra, and of course the history of the symphonic music in general. And amazingly, the group list grew to nearly 1,000. People were very interested in this whole thing. Then the war began in March 2003, and of course put an end to all of this. Before that, we were communicating even in 2001, and of course, the September events, then the war in Afghanistan, the tour was killed forever. But their interest continued, that during the war they wanted to send contributions to the music and ballet school in Baghdad and the orchestra. The symphony orchestra. So I got involved in that as well, and I went to Baghdad twice, in 2003 under the occupation, and in 2004 to take donations and instruments. Of course, because the instruments or the donations were coming from the industrial West, the media, they just want to grab the story. This is like the hottest story ever. And what happened is also in December of 2003, they joined the Washington National Symphony. They had a show in the Kennedy Center where all the neocons and their wives were at the theater. Bush and his wife, Rumsfeld, Cheney, and it really stained the whole project, made it very political. So, as a result, from 2001 until I stopped dealing with the subject matter because it turned so political in 2003, I accumulated an incredible amount of information for the musical scenes. During the era of King Ghazi, the Institute of Music, or Ma'had al-Musiqi, was established in 1936. The same time with the Baghdad radio was 1936. Of course, this was the official beginning for the music scene in Iraq, which started not only the academic learning of music, but also the pleasure of listening and appreciating music. Prior to that year, 1936, and because of the British occupation and mandate since 1917, most of the musical institutions and bands were established by the British, and for the pleasure and taste of the British. Most evident among these institutions were the army bands established in Baghdad, Mosul, and Basra, the main cities. So the army band in Baghdad was organized by the English major Goldfield in the early 1920s. While the one in Mosul was established, luckily we have an exact year for that, 1923. One of the Mosul military band's distinguished instructors was an Iraqi, Hanna Patros, who died in 1958. Upon the establishment of the Ma'had al-Musiqi, Hanna Patros also was appointed its first director, the Institute of Music. And the famous Sharif Muhyiddin Haidar, a very well-known musician and composer in the Middle East, was appointed to be one of its prominent teachers. In 1939, this Music of Institute became the Institute of Fine Arts. They changed the name, Ma'had al-Funun al-Jamila. Again, this was the same year in which King Ghazi was killed, 1939. In this year, the Royal Guards, the Royal Guard bands, was conducted by a half Iraqi, whose father is Iraqi, his mother is British, called Albert Shafu. And this is actually the Royal Guards band, part of the Iraqi army. They had regular weekly radio concerts, mainly of Western classical music. And they performed English-style symphonic music. These radio programs, by the way, continued till 1952, because that's the year when Albert Shafu left Iraq, and he's currently living in the US. He became the first Iraqi director, actually, of the Army Music Department in 1939. And then he established a music school within the Army. At the Institute of Fine Arts, a chamber orchestra was founded in 1941. It gave actually one performance at the Royal Medical College. And then after that, they kind of merged with others. Some musicians left and some other musicians came and continued giving concerts. For instance, another one took place at the Royal College of Medicine on Saturday, April 22nd, 1944. I was very happy to see an exact date. In 1948, this Institute of Fine Arts orchestra was actually linked with the Baghdad Philharmonic Society. It was established a few months prior to that. The Baghdad Philharmonic Society then established the Baghdad Symphony Orchestra and also began to perform concerts. They were actually consisting of musicians and composers very well known from the army band, foreigners and Iraqis. And then a Romanian violin professor became, Sandu Elbu, was supervising the Baghdad Symphony Orchestra. And they have performed, for instance, in 1948 and all through 59, also in Kirkuk and other cities and so on. Now, what happened is that this is an interesting turning point, because now it became only Iraqi, 1959. That is under the leadership of Abdul Karim Qasim, 1958 revolution, under his advice to make this the official orchestra of the country, whereby they perform, rehearse, and do all kind of activities based on monthly salaries. They used to do everything voluntarily before that. Now, 1959, we begin with the history of what became to be called the Iraqi National Symphony Orchestra. That's the official name given to it in 1959. So in documenting its history, although it became official in 1959, it's, of course, it goes back in the early 40s with all these beginnings I just told you about with the Baghdad Philharmonic Orchestra. There was a time in Iraq of serious instability in the 1960s. So because of that, the orchestra was seized performing a couple of times. The first time when it stopped performing was in 1961, during the time of Ismail Arif, who was the Ministry of Culture at that time. A year later, the INSO was called to perform in celebration of the Baghdad Millennium. So they were called to perform a concert. The second time it ceased operation, the Iraqi National Symphony Orchestra, INSO, was in 1966. And that is during the Naji Talib cabinet. In 1970, finally, it was brought up back to life by Shafiq al-Kamali, the Minister of Information. He's also a poet, a well-known poet and a published poet. Simultaneously, an administrative committee was formed, consisted of Mundhir Jameel Hafiz, who is still living in Baghdad, Ihsan Adham, who is now in Denmark, and the late Asad Muhammad Ali, as well as Bassem Hanna Potros, who's now in New Zealand. So, of course, special efforts from a woman, Lam'an al-Bakri, who was part of the Ministry of Information. With the administrative committee, it came back to life, and it began not only to perform in Iraq, but also toured around Russia and Moscow and Azerbaijan, and also went to Lebanon. In the 1990s, actually, during the embargo, they performed here in Jordan. Since its establishment in the 1940s, the INSO had 22 Iraqi and foreign conductors. The orchestra did not just perform classical work of Europe, by the way. It also performed their own music. Two kinds, either folkloric music that was turned into symphonic orchestration, or their own composition that was played within the orchestra. The list of Iraqi composers includes, but not limited to, Hanna Patros, died in 1958, Farid Allawardi, who is now in Ireland, Mundhir Jameel Hafiz, who is now in Baghdad, Abdul Razzaq Al-Azzawi, I am unaware where he is, Beatrice Ohanessian in the US, Munir Bashir, late Munir Bashir, died in 1997. Khalil Ismail, I am not aware where he is, and also I'm not aware about Abdel Amir Al-Sarraf. These are all composers for the orchestra. Agnes Bashir, who lives in Jordan now, and actually called me last night. Hussein Qaddouri, I believe died last year. Muhammad Amin Izzat, I think he is in Germany, but I'm not 100% sure. Zaid Uthman, Muhammad Siddiq, and others are all in Jordan. They are now actually musicians for the Royal Jordanian Orchestra. Muhammad Siddiq, who is a composer, also conducting the Royal Jordanian Orchestra here in Amman. As I indicated, they performed in 1990s here in Jordan. In December 2003, I told you that they performed in Washington, D.C. After that, they performed a couple of concerts in Baghdad, but it was really extremely risky under the occupation with the killing and the lack or absence of electricity and so on and so forth. I would like you to listen to one composition. I think I mentioned Munir Bashir, but I forgot to mention Jameel Bashir, who is also a brother and died before him. This is his composition orchestrated for the Iraqi National Symphony Orchestra, and it was actually recorded on a CD here in Amman. Sorry, let me return from the beginning. Here we go. Can you hear? That's it. Thank you for coming.